Okay, so we're going to look at weighted voting as the next part of voting. And what I mean by weighted voting is that some people aren't going to count as much as others, or some people's votes are going to count higher than others. All right. Now, situations where this could arise are things like if somebody owns more of a company, or if somebody is more invested in a decision, oftentimes their vote will have a higher weight given to it. All right. And also, there you can imagine times where decisions apply only to certain groups. Okay. Most of the time, though, this is a situation where we think of like ownerships of companies or things of that nature. A good example of this would be the United Nations. There's a select group of countries who actually have the vast majority of the voting power at the UN, and you can look that up and things like that. It's not going to be as straightforward as what I'm going to go through, but it is there. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to assign a weight or however many votes that a voter gets. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that a voter is going to be assigned a number of votes, and that number of votes is going to be called the weight. All right, so each voter is going to be assigned some weight. Now, in order to pass a motion, and in this sense, we're only going to talk about passing or failing a motion. So we're going to only have two options here, and majority rule, majority number of votes, anyways, is not going to be necessarily a simple 50% majority. It may be set at a higher bar, and that whatever that bar is set at is the quota. Okay. The quota is the number of votes needed to pass. So you might have to get 50% of the vote. You may have to get 75%. You may have to get 90% of the vote to pass a motion. All right? The situation depends on where things are. Now, you'll often see when we're talking about these weighted voting scenarios, the notation Q and then W1, W2, all the way to WN. Q is obviously the quota, and the W's are the different weights for each voter. Okay. Now, what's going to happen is, obviously, the voters are going to all be assigned their weights. And we're going to keep a very simple situation. We're going to have each voter vote either to pass or fail a motion. Okay? And so all of those people who vote to pass the motion form what's known as a coalition, a group of people. All right? And in fact, any group of people you can think of as being a coalition. All right? So again, just to refresh this, we're doing weighted voting. Each voter is going to be assigned a weight. We're going to vote on one of two outcomes. In this thing, we'll call those two outcomes pass or fail. Each voter puts all of their votes on either pass or fail. And we're going to make some coalitions, and a winning coalitions has at least the amount of the quota. So if the quota is 25, a winning coalition would have 25 or more votes. Okay? So let's take an example. Here we have 19 total votes. So if you add these things up, the total weight is 19. And we've made the quota 10 here. So with this vote, whether voter A votes to pass, B votes to fail, C votes to pass, D, E, and F all vote to fail, does the motion pass or fail? Well, it should be fairly obvious that here we have two people voting to pass. A and C have a total of 12 votes. So that's higher than the quota, so we pass. If A and C would have had less than 12 votes, then it would have failed. All right. Now there's some observations we can make with this, and we'll make a few observations. Notice that the quota is 10, and voter A had actually 10 votes. Okay, that's kind of a big deal in this scenario. Now let's take a step back for a minute. When we say a quota, all right, I said it has to be at least 50%. It could have been more. In this case, all we did was there's 19 total votes, so 10 was just a simple majority. But oftentimes you would want to make a quota much more than 50%. Maybe you want to make it 75%. Now, that person A had 10 votes, okay? So the number of votes they had exceeded the quota. So that person A was a dictator, meaning they basically had all the power. If they vote for the quota to pass, it passes. If they vote for the quota to fail, then it fails. Or excuse me, the motion to pass, it passes. And if they vote for the motion to fail, it fails. Okay? Now, A could have been, so A had the number of votes that would pass the motion. But A also had the number of votes to block the motion. Okay? So A, that voter, by themselves, is a blocking coalition. All right? And by the way, a blocking coalition, A and C would have together been a blocking coalition as well, because they have enough votes to defeat the motion. All right? In this case, it took 10 votes to pass, and it takes 10 votes to defeat the motion. But regardless, that gives A veto power. It's an individual who has enough votes to block the entire thing. All right? And in fact, there's some interesting things. Obviously, the President of the United States has veto power. Also, at the UN, there's those select few countries I was talking about earlier have veto powers in certain situations. Okay? Now, another thing is something is called a dummy. It's a voter who, if they switch sides, the outcome never changes. So there is that voter D and E and F at the end who had one vote. Turns out it doesn't matter how D votes. If D votes with A, it passes. If D didn't vote with A, it didn't pass. So D is a dummy voter. In fact, B would have also been a dummy voter. Even though B has 4 votes, doesn't really matter if they switch sides or not. Okay, the outcome never changes whether B switched sides in the previous example. All right, so like I said here, A was a dictator in this example. A had veto power, and dummy voters, basically all of the voters here, B, C, D, E, and F, were all dummy voters, because no matter what they vote for or against, it doesn't change the motion. All right? So let's take a second example, and we're going to create a situation where they have to have, what do I want to say? Have to make coalitions in order to pass a motion. So in this case, we have 5 voters, and each of them is given different weights. In this situation, we have A, B, and D passing, and C and E failing. Quota here is 20. So, in fact, if you add this up, the total weights, 10 plus 6 plus 7 plus 5 plus 1, you'll get 29 total votes. So the quota is much over 50%. It's about, 2/3 or something like that. So anyways, in this case, A and B and D, A and B and D Well, 10 plus 6 plus 5 gives me 21 votes. So the motion does pass. All right. So A, B, and D was a winning coalition. It was a group of voters which, in fact, won the group of voters who won. All right, or who, if they vote as a coalition, would pass the motion. Now, in this idea, notice that there's no dictator. There's no one single person who has enough votes by themselves to pass a motion. Okay? Now, remember, we had a weight of 29, and our quota was 20. Right? So in this case, even though there's no dictator, well, if A doesn't vote for the motion, if A votes to fail, say A votes to fail, everybody else's vote, when you add it up, adds to 19. So A actually does have veto power. So even though A is not a dictator, A does have veto power. Okay? And then to try to figure out if it's a dummy voter or not, whether there could be a coalition which mattered. Well, it kind of requires me to look at all the winning coalitions. All right. So let's take a look at some winning coalitions. All right, and we kind of do this. We should do this systematically. There's no one voter, so we're gonna look at all the sort of the one person winning coalitions. There's no one voter who could have a winning coalition. And if you look at A and B, that adds up to 16. A and C adds up to 17. A and D adds up to 15. A and E adds up to 11. And you could check out all the pairs. None of the pairs add up to that 20 either. So there's no pairs in the set of winning coalitions. But once we get to 3, well, notice that if you take A, B, and C, all right, A, B, and C win. So A, B, and C is winning coalition. Right? A, B, and D is also a winning coalition. A, B, D. Notice if you do A, B, and E, that doesn't work. All right? So that's the sort of the A, B's. How about the next thing? A and C. A, C, and D do work. All right? That forms a winning coalition. Okay? A, C, and E does not work because that only has 18 votes. So A, C, and E. Okay? And you can look at all the other 3 sort of pairs. There's no other triples that will work. If you do B, C, and D, we don't add up to 19. If you did B, C, and E, we don't add up to 19. All right, so checking all the other triples, you can see that they don't work. Now, these aren't the only winning coalitions because we could have 4 people. So you could do A, B, C, and D. That would work. Turns out A, B, C, and E would also work. A, C, D, and E, that would work. And did I get them all? So we missed E, D, B, C, A, B, D, D, and E would also work. So I have all of the sets of size 4 except B, C, D, and E. And if you look at B, C, D, and E, that only adds up to 19. We've said that before, so that's not a winning coalition. And then take another winning coalition as our last one, which includes all 5 voters. If all 5 voters vote to pass, then obviously the motion passes. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look for, like I said, dummy voters. So we're going to look for a voter where if I eliminate them, they really never mattered. Okay? So notice here, we'll start with voter A, and we're going to decide if that's a dummy voter or not. Clearly, if I eliminate A from this grouping, B and C don't win. So A is not a dummy voter. How about B? Well, if I eliminate B from this grouping, obviously A and C don't win. So B is not a dummy voter. Same thing with C. A and B don't win by themselves. Okay? D is not a dummy voter because A and B would, by themselves, lose. All right? So A, B, C, and D, none of those are dummy voters because, again, there are coalitions where if one of them drops off, or let's say A drops off, it changes the outcome. So the only question is, if I drop off E from all of these coalitions, would we still win? And if I drop from this guy, yes, A, B, and C still win. So E didn't matter there. A, C, and D would still win. So E doesn't matter. A, B, and D still wins. So E didn't matter. And A, B, C, D still wins. So E doesn't matter. So in this case, it turns out E is our only dummy voter. Okay? Because if I go through every single winning coalition that E's in, it really didn't matter if he was in it or not. We'd have still won. Or that group would have still won. All right, so let's take a look at, we did winning coalitions. Winning coalitions, let me just do this. We saw the winning coalitions on the last slide. Winning coalitions had to get the quota of 20, all right? A blocking coalition, in this example, well, the quota was 20. The total weight was 29, right? So a blocking coalition just has to have 10 as the total weight. And by that I mean, if the blocking coalition has 10, then the other coalition would have 19. All right? So if a coalition has 10 or more, then it's a blocking coalition. And there's lots of these in this example. All right? In fact, if I start listing these all off, A is a blocking coalition by itself. And then any pair with A is a blocking coalition by themselves. So if you did A and B, and A and C, and A and D, and A and E. And then if you look at things like BC, that's a blocking coalition. BD, that's a blocking coalition. BE is not a blocking coalition because that only has 7. All right, so BC, BD work. CD also works. CE does not work. Neither does DE. Okay, so here we have all the sort of pairs of blocking coalitions. And it turns out any of the triples will be a blocking coalition. Anything with 3 voters. And go through these for yourself. If you have any 3 voters, you're going to get a blocking coalition. And any 4 voters are going to be a blocking coalition. Okay? And so I'm not going to list all of the combinations of 3 and 4 voters, but I do want to say I'll just write it down. Any 3 voters, any 4 voters, and if they do all 5 voters, are also blocking coalitions. All right. Again, I'm not going to take too much time on that, on writing those things down, but that's how it works. All right. Now, here's the deal. What we're going to do is we're going to look at what's called a critical player. All right. So we saw at the very beginning that the coalition of A, well, we didn't have this exact one. I'm going to write that a little darker. We have A, B, D, and E. And that's a winning coalition. If you count up, we have 22 votes. All right. So that would win. Now, if you remember what I was doing to determine whether E was a dummy voter, the reverse of that is basically the critical idea. So here we have a winning coalition. We can ask ourselves, which one of these people, or are all of them, or most of them, are they critical? Meaning, essentially, if I drop out one of them, do I still have a winning coalition? All right? So in this group, A is critical. Because if you delete A and you're just left with B, D, E, B, D, E gets you up to 12 votes. And that's not enough to pass the quota. So A is critical in this winning coalition. It turns out B is also critical. If you look at A, D, and E, you get up to 16 votes. And so, in this case, B is also critical. For the same reason, D is critical. If you drop it out, you get to 17, you don't get up to the quota. But E is non-critical. Okay? So D is critical. And E in this winning coalition is not. Now, the reason we're going over critical players and winning coalitions is because that's going to have something to do with how much power they have. Okay? Essentially, what we're going to say here is that really E doesn't have any influence. Even though they have a weight of 1, they really don't matter in terms of the overall vote. Okay? But A, B, and D do. So we're going to look at, in the next section, how much power really resides with A, B, D, and E.